Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Donald Altman, author, psychotherapist, and former Buddhist monk. Please enjoy Donald Altman. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I am super excited to chat today with Donald Altman, author and psychotherapist. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, hi, Mari. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you so much for agreeing to join me in this conversation about creativity. But before we dive into that, if you could let our listeners know a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Well, I am a psychotherapist and author, as you said. I've written some 20 books on mindfulness and self-help and spirituality. And I actually have my first novel coming out beginning of next year. So that was a little different way to kind of access creativity for me. I've worked with writers, and I really enjoy working with the creative process. So it was fun when I got your invitation to be on the show.
Nice. And that's so exciting, that transition from kind of mindfulness meditation into novels. I'm curious, what was that process like, and how do they differ?
Well, it's interesting because when I'm writing my nonfiction books, they're very structured for me, and I have it kind of laid out in advance, but yet I'm drawing upon the vast experience that I have with mindfulness and working and teaching mindfulness and around the neuroscience of mindfulness. So I'm able to draw on a lot of things that I have accessible to me, and there's a kind of a structure and a purpose to it, and each book is very different in the kind of what it's trying to teach. So with the novel, it was a lot more wide open, and really, after 25 pages, I was ready to quit. I was like, I just can't do this. And but I realized, well, I just have to open up to a different kind of creative process here. Many years ago, I wrote for a children's television program. I've written fiction before, but it had been a while, so I had to allow myself to get into a creative space, and mindfulness actually helped me with that, where we go, sometimes it would take a little break, like in this novel, it's called Travelers. It's going to be out in 2023 in January. But the character's a psychiatrist who's struggling with loss. He's lost his daughter, and he's not finding a way to get over his grief. And through a mysterious traveler, a sentient canine, and a psychotic patient who come to his psych ward, he starts to heal in this very unusual way. And at one point I had to find a spirit animal for him, because he's going to go through a shamanic process in the story. And my the mind that is the more executive function minds are, okay, I've got to come up with a good animal here. What should that be? And I have my own preference. I like tigers. I like big animals, and they're fast. But it just wasn't working for the story. And I said, no, this isn't right. And I realized I needed to step back. And so I did some meditation, spent some time in nature, and just stopped trying, right? Stopped trying to force it, and allowed that kind of intellect to get out of the way. And all of a sudden an image popped in my head, and I was like, wow, that's it. In fact, that spirit animal is on the cover. I don't want to give it away, but
don't give it away.
It's
Make
actually
people
on the cover
search it.
on the cover of the book, and it really surprised me when I saw what it was.
Yeah.
And it was very, very surprising for the character too, who found this
Uh-huh.
to be his, because he didn't really want that as his spirit animal.
Sure. I love that. I love the kind of getting out of the space where it's only intellectual and allowing that subconscious space to bubble up a little bit more, and then being willing to be surprised by what arises.
Well, the word surprise is really great there, because actually I was telling you a little bit before we started this interview that I had interviewed on a show that I do Lyle Kessler, who's one of America's most celebrated playwrights.
Yeah.
And Lyle said, he has to get creative with his work, has to get his intellect out of the way. And he said, imagination is genius. He said, otherwise we drive down, roads that have been paved already, and we're more likely to do that. And then in terms of brain science, that is so true. It was a psychologist, Donald Hebb, back in the late 40s said, neurons that fire together, wire together. And it's true, if we tend to have ways of solving problems that we've used in the past and they've maybe tended to work, that we start using those same pathways over and over, but they may not provide us with the freshest, the newest, the kind of perspective that's called for. Right. And so we need to, and new brain research shows that creativity actually gets networks that were working independently to now talk to one another. They start communicating, they start integrating. So isn't that kind of wonderful, creating new brain growth to help us think in fresh ways?
I mean, I see creativity as the ultimate personal growth journey. And it really speaks to that, and how our brain is creating new experiences and having new adventures when we are
relational.
creative.
We're profoundly relational and emotional, and so we're getting new parts of the brain to relate to one another. We're relating to our outside world in new ways. And I think creativity is very participatory, and mindfulness is a participatory skill, because you're not just mindful on your own, you're mindful in relationship to your own thoughts, to your body, to other people you meet, to your environment. And when I do workshops, I say, okay, the first thing I want us to do is, if we're going to be mindful, we have to know who's in our environment. What does it look like around us? And it's not just what we're thinking and what our sensations are, but it's our whole interaction. And then if we can be open with that, it's funny. I've had people walk around the space, and I say, I want you to experience this space moment by moment, and to try to, notice your breath, but as you're moving around. And people will see things that they just never, they came into this big workshop room and they never saw, for example, the giant Christmas tree that was in the corner with all the ornaments on it. They never even saw it. They'll have people say, wow, until I walked around, I never saw that tree, or I never saw this giant painting over here, or whatever. And so we open up to new possibilities and new connections. And that's the beauty of mindfulness. And of course, we can use it for our creative living. Yeah.
And mindfulness and creativity happen in the present moment. Like, it's all about the present moment experience. It's hard to have creativity happen in the past or in the future. We don't know. It's happening right now in the moment.
So true.
Yeah. Well, I'm so curious, with all of the creative flexing that you do in your life, what does it mean to you to be creative?
It's interesting. I don't think I can separate creativity from just living.
Yeah.
From just being and living each day. I think laughter is one of the great lubricants to creativity. In fact, if you can laugh at things, you're shifting, you're changing your perspective. Something difficult happens and you can laugh at it. One time I was in the monastery. I haven't told this story very often, a long time actually, but when I was in the monastery and I ordained as a monk for a period of time, we would have breakfast, or we'd have a breakfast, then a lunch. We wouldn't eat after afternoon, except for they'd put out some hot tea at around 3 o'clock. And so I'd go on to get some hot tea. And of course, nobody's talking because there's signs on the wall and they say noble silence and everything. So I get some tea and I put it down on this very old rickety table. I mean, there was the monastery, just very old furniture. And so I put it down on this table. And as I sat, I put a little too much weight on that table with my hand. The tea fell and it poured all, I mean, it was scalding me. And I fell down to the floor. The table fell onto the floor. And I think I let out a yell of pain. And, and this monk comes running in and he sees me on the floor with the tea and everything and the table smashed in half. And he just starts to laugh.
Oh.
And I started to laugh, seeing him laugh. It was just really a funny moment. But the laughter can get us through even those challenges, can't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think laughter is, when you think about it, laughter takes you out of a fixed mindset. If you're in a fixed mindset, or you're very, serious about something, it's got to be like this. Once you start to laugh about it, or you think that, see it from a different viewpoint, or you can elevate above it or something, then things aren't as fixed.
Yeah, they don't feel as heavy or as like tight. As you were talking and hearing you say the fixed mindset, or it just feels so contained, which really isn't what creativity feels like in my world.
Relationships, if you think about, I can think about with my wife and I, sometimes you dig your heels in on something that's meaningless, really. I like this. Oh, I want the napkin holder to be over here. It's always been over there. And then you start arguing about it, and all of a sudden you realize how meaningless it is where. And then we stopped in the middle, and one or the other of us will say, well, I don't care where the paper holder is. Why am I arguing? And we laugh, and doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it helps you break free sometimes in relationships of getting places where you're kind of stuck. Just being able to laugh at yourself and
I remember
our foibles, our human foibles.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. When I was younger, I was working for a theater company, and we were so focused and stressed out. And I never forget the director coming up to me and a colleague of mine and pulling us into the theater and setting a timer and saying, you need to laugh for the next 3 minutes. And then we can go back to work, but you have to let this go. And that, we were able to shift a lot of energy and then not feel as stressed.
Brilliant. What a brilliant director you had there to say that. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, you have been talking a little bit about, how you were facing creative challenges in writing this novel. And I'm curious, in other areas of your life, how do you face challenges and how does creativity show up in that?
It's interesting. Even, we're faced with so many challenges daily and different things. And even I just think around the house here, my wife and I got a house and things start breaking and you have to decide, what am I going to do here? Or we had a situation here, I live in Oregon, where the power was off for 10 days because of, we had an ice storm. And so we had to start thinking about what are we going to do? How are we going to create a backup so this maybe doesn't have, we don't have to be freezing here for 10 days again. And so it just allow yourself not to get reactive, but to be responsive. And I think that's creativity. Creativity is adaptability, is they have something they call response flexibility for resilience. So if you're going to problem solve something, you need the energy, the willpower to do it. And you also need way power, which means different pathways over an obstacle or around an obstacle. And these two ideas, way power and willpower, by the way, are from a guy, C.R. Snyder, who wrote the Handbook of Hope. He developed the whole psychology in the field of hope, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
And so when people are low in hope, they either can't problem solve or they can't energize themselves enough or get motivated. So I think creativity also in the motivation part is to think of ways to keep ourselves inspired, right? And for me, it's nature. For me, it's looking at nature, it's getting out and walking, just observing the little thing, watching the birds, watching the trees swaying in the wind or whatever it is. And that's very inspiring to me. I had a sense of awe, a sense of wonder that I get. And that's inspiring. For some people, it might be getting, looking up an inspiring quotation and carrying that with you like once every week.
Nice.
Finding something that can get you grounded or get you inspired. So I think we need to think of ways to do that, to generate the willpower, which is necessary for creativity, really, or any endeavor.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, as an adult, recognizing all of these pieces of creativity and mindfulness, and what's your earliest memory of being creative?
I think it was playing.
Yeah.
It was just playing. We played a lot of hide and seek. I lived in Chicago. And there were so many places to hide. I mean, there were basements and between cars, and I mean, but we had a lot of fun just playing. And I remember, I think I wrote my first poem that interestingly got published when I was in third grade.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah, that was about a bird, actually. The robin or something. Those were my favorite birds back when I was a kid.
Nice.
But I think it was just playing. My memories of just having fun and playing, and that was creatively stimulating. I mean, I liked doing artworks in school and things like that. And I remember we had a lot of opportunity to make montages and put poetry to montages and things like that when I was in grade school. And that's a memory that sticks with me too.
Nice. Do you feel like this play that you did as a kid that you've brought with you into adulthood, or is it something that you try to actively incorporate?
Yeah, it probably is something that I bring in from back then. And my wife thinks I'm kind of childish sometimes. But maybe that's, I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I think we can be silly. We can allow ourselves to let go. And if it feels good in that way, then it's not harming anybody, right?
Right.
Why not allow ourselves to laugh? I think we need more of that in our world today, especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing about creativity that I wanted to mention is that I think that in terms of participation, I think one of the things that maybe is holding us more back is how much time we are spending on screens. When our attention is captured by something that's fixed or maybe entertaining us, but it's holding our attention and we're observers. And I think to get creative, I mean, it can be natural and spontaneous, but it can also be, I think creativity is also a process of reflecting inwardly. And if your attention is always going outward on something, and which it is often with so many of the screens we look at. And I think the Kaiser Family Foundation says 8 to 18-year-olds look at screens about 7.5 more hours or more a day. And adults about 5 to 6 hours a day. And I remember I worked with a young man who he was gaming to such an extent that I had him calculate his hours. I thought it was kind of interesting because waking up tired, and they thought he had ADHD, and were giving him some medications for that. And I said, maybe you're just really tired. He was going to bed at like 1 or 2 in the morning. He was putting in about 3,000 hours of time gaming in addition to going to school. I said, well, that's like a job plus a lot of overtime.
Right. Wow. Yeah.
And
when you really break it down.
And so I had him start to track his time. The average American has, I think, a 200-hour per year sleep deficit. So he came in one time, this young man was And he said to me, he said, I had a 13-hour sleep deficit this week. I said, really? Wow, that's interesting. How did you find that out? And he held up his phone and he said, I have an app for that. So there's
Classic.
good and there's bad, right? We need to
Yeah.
balance it. I'm not saying that, I mean, technology has enhanced our lives in wonderful ways, but we do need to balance. And I think if, if you have a preponderance or an overwhelming amount of screen time, you might think about how that might be keeping you from reflecting, or maybe from thinking of other ways of being creative.
Yeah. Or even acting or engaging in creativity that's off of a screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a client one time who was having a problem he lost his job, and that's the reason he came to me. He was very depressed, and he was having a number of all these negative ruminating thoughts. And I said, wow, you have a lot of reasons why you can't move forward. I said, and he had mentioned that he'd gone to improv class and liked that. I said, would you mind, I don't know, do you watch Letterman? And he said he did. I said, would you mind doing like a top 10 list of the reasons you can't move forward and bring it in? It's kind of like I wanted him to get out of himself, to look at these from a distance, to look at these thoughts. And he came back to me. What he said was fascinating. Even before he shared the list, he said, I got to tell you something. I looked at this list. He said to me, this is how my mother thinks.
Whoa.
And and he said, I don't want to think like that anymore. And so we talked about improv that he enjoyed. And I said, what would it be like, not to be stuck in the old scripts, like the scripts you were programmed with, that you grew up with, that your mother's script, right?
Right.
But to create your own script each moment as an improv with, when you're going on an interview, right? So you don't have to have that script of I can't. Right? Or when you're meeting someone new, or all these, that you could allow yourself to be in that moment in a fresh way. And he really took to that. It really made a difference in his life. I mean, I gave him a lot of credit, because he was willing to try to improv in his own life. But when he realized how he was using these old programs, that really made an impact. And I think we all do it, and there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, it's those hard wiring neurons. It makes it easier in some ways to do a lot of things. We don't have to recreate the wheel every time we do something.
Right.
But just recognizing when you might be in a rut, right? And when you need to try something new.
Yeah. And embracing that the yes and, which is like the foundation of improv. And I love that. And I also love the piece of really inviting with intention to have more creativity show up, because I think many people really struggle. They want to be creative, but they don't know where to start, or they don't know how to do it. And so
I'm sure you've heard people say, oh, I'm not creative.
A million times.
Yeah.
Millions of times.
Yeah. And it just, I think that they don't recognize when they are, or just don't realize how to invoke that state of mind, and how to set the intention for it, and start to.
And it's like a muscle. Like if you wanted to build a muscle, you have to use it. You have to flex it.
Yeah.
And that's how I see creativity. We all have the capacity to be creative. You actually have to use it.
I like that. Yeah, I like thinking of it as a muscle in that way. Yeah, you have to use it, utilize it.
Yeah.
And think of new ways to use it. Yeah.
Exactly. The more creative, the better. The sillier, the goofier, get to, turn something into something else. That's, I think, a great place to start.
Yeah, it's like alchemy, right?
Yeah. How many things can you, how many different objects can you turn a circle into? Like, that's a fun one to do. Yeah. Well, for someone who may not think they're creative, how would you, I know we just kind of talked a little bit about this, but how would you encourage someone to find or seek creativity out in their life?
Well, maybe I could share this umbrella
Absolutely.
technique idea
Yeah.
that I have used with a lot of clients. And I was fortunate enough to find out about it. I went to a workshop. It was a writing workshop, and it was being taught by a guy named Danny Simon. He's the brother of Neil Simon, and some of you may or may not have heard of Neil Simon, who was one of the great writers and wrote a lot of films and plays, The Odd Couple and things like that. But Neil Simon and Danny Simon, Woody Allen, Buck Henry, who wrote The Graduate, Larry Gelbart, who created the series MASH. All those people, and I should mention Mel Tolkien, who was a well-known Hollywood writer. I had the good fortune to meet Mel Tolkien one time. So I went to this workshop, and all those people were on this Your Show of Shows, which was one of television's first comedy and variety sketch programs. Sid Caesar, Imogene Coca, Carl Reiner were like stars on the show. And so the writers, they had this idea they called the umbrella technique. And they would draw like a semicircle in the shape of an umbrella, top of an umbrella on the blackboard, which I guess they were using back then. And then they would all come up with ideas for the sketch. They would maybe have an idea, a man's walking down the street and something funny happens, and what happens, and there's all write things down without censoring. So if you have a problem or have something you're thinking about, I tried this with a client, for example, who she was stuck in a job that was making her very unhappy, and everybody was pushing her, go back to school and do, and it was all very cerebral, and just nothing was really felt right for her. And I said, let's do this umbrella technique. So we drew the umbrella in my office, and I said, okay, just give me ideas of other jobs and things that come up to mind. Don't censor anything. Everything is okay here, no matter how silly, ridiculous, improbable, impossible you think it may be, right? And so she started coming up with ideas, and I wrote them all down under the umbrella. And then it took a few minutes for her to write down all these ideas, and very different ideas. Being a chef, being a tour guide, riding a bicycle, all different kinds of things. But I looked at the list, and I sat back and I looked at it, and she was looking at it. I said, let's just spend some time now and just look at this list of things you created here. What was obvious to me that she didn't see right away was that everything on the list was very tactile and spatial and something you would do with your hands. That was not the work she was doing, that she was unhappy with. And so I asked her, I said, do you see anything in common about all these things that are up there? And she says, not really, but they all have to do with some kind of movement. I said, yeah, they're all things using your hands, things using your body. And a light bulb went off. She says, that's what I always liked doing. And she actually became a professional chef.
That's amazing.
And so the umbrella technique can get you to see things. You might see themes there. You might see patterns and things you write down. You might not notice it until after you write all these things down, or maybe you just see something that piques your interest.
Yeah.
But I think it's a nice way, a very simple way, in just a matter of a few minutes, to use that creativity muscle, right, that you talked about, and to generate some new ideas.
Yeah,
And
I
the
love
thing
that.
the thing to do here too is to do it without any expectation of getting an answer, getting it right. Right, because that's what your discursive mind, that's what the the executive center, the left brain wants to do. It wants to grab on to that one right answer, but we want to use a more integrative, holistic approach here. So we want to allow the right brain to exercise too.
Yeah.
And so so letting go is a very important, just intentionally, even before you start, I like to have people take some nice breaths and just kind of set the intention that they're going to do this without holding on too tightly to the expectation of what may result from it.
Yeah.
So just being open.
I love that. I mean, such a great technique and skill and sharing. Thank you so much for sharing the
Oh, you're
umbrella
welcome.
technique.
You're
That's
welcome.
great. I
I mean,
hope.
I've had fun working with people, seeing how
Yeah.
that has helped them, and
Mhm.
I resort to it myself as well. I mean, it's just a fun process to go through,
Yeah. And
and it gives
I
some structure to the creative process.
right. And I think that is what creativity is about, having fun in the process.
Yeah, yeah,
So how it lends itself to having some fun, letting go of expectations, being in that moment, getting into that flow of naming however many things you can in this specific arena. Yeah, I love it. Thanks for
yeah.
sharing
Well, I
that.
feel like that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, having that back and forth and the
Yeah.
creative flow, I think, is such a gift that we get to experience. So, yeah. Well, it has been such a treat to chat with you. I just have one last question.
Yeah, Mari.
What does it feel like in your body to be creative?
Hmm. You know, that's a great question, because I think it's important to allow ourselves to get embodied
Yeah.
when we're being creative, when we're in this moment. It's a good feeling.
Mhm.
I'd say it's a positive feeling, almost like a bit of a tingling
Nice.
sensation in the body. Um, uh, it's an interesting feeling. I mean, it's definitely a pleasurable kind of open
Yeah.
feeling that I have. It's
Nice.
kind of hard to put into words, because it is so much in just a
In the
feeling of the body.
experience of
Yeah,
it.
and the
Yeah.
experience of it.
Well, thank you for putting words to the experience and integrating that moment for all of us. I really appreciate it. If people want to learn more about the things that you do, books that you've written, how could they go about doing that?
Oh, you know what? Thank you for asking that. You could go to my website, which is mindfulpractices.com. That's
Mhm.
one word, MINDFUL, one L, practices.com. And I have a newsletter subscribe button that you can click on, and then you just fill in your name and email, and then send that to me. It says subscribe. I'll then you'll receive a little notice saying, yeah, you're in. And and every month I have a new a newsletter.
Mhm.
Sometimes connects to my blog. I write a blog for Psychology Today
Mhm.
every month, and talking about a lot of really interesting ideas with mindfulness, and just how to live a, a happier, more fulfilling life. And also, you can find out about my books there and other courses that I have. So I have a books page, and Travelers is up there, even though it's just kind of a preview at this point. I haven't
Mhm.
You can't buy it yet, but if you subscribe to my newsletter, I'll make sure that you find out about that when it is released in January of 23.
Wonderful. Well, I
Yeah.
will put that in the show notes so people have easy access
Oh, great.
to that. And thank you again for taking the time to chat with me about creativity. It's been such a treat
Well,
to chat.
thanks, Mario. Same here, and we get to do it again sometime.
Me too. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We are at Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your reviews, comments, and questions. Check out our website, sustainingcreativity.com, for upcoming offerings and creativity coaching. Tune in Tuesdays for our next episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.